Chapter 5. My journey to find meaning took an unexpected turn when I developed a deep affection for a woman. I no longer had the time I once devoted to research and reading. Most of my time was now spent with her, and our conversations often turned to religion and whether it could serve as a singular source of meaning. While we shared similar foundational beliefs, we differed in our views on the authority of the Bible versus external sources of revelation. She was Catholic, and I considered myself an evangelical Christian, though my earlier experience with the Bible study group had left me confused and uncertain. Despite our differences, we seemed remarkably compatible. Still, she wrestled with the idea of the afterlife as the sole source of meaning. To her, living entirely for a distant future felt like a missed opportunity. Life, she argued, was a gift, and it made little sense to receive a gift without embracing it fully.
We have one life to live,
she often said.
If we don't do everything we can to make this life meaningful and pleasant, we're wasting that gift.
At times she reinforced her view with a more nihilistic reflection.
Centuries from now, no one will even remember we were here.
My own reflections and research had brought me to a kind of philosophical fork in the road. Either everything we do matters or nothing does. To me, the former seemed more reasonable. Every action ripples outward, making the world a little bit better or a little bit worse. I pointed to our meeting as an example. The simple fact that we met could change our lives, her boyfriend's life, and many others in ways none of us could predict. If we ended up marrying and having children, those children would not have existed if she stayed with her boyfriend. I would likely marry someone else, build a different family, and live a completely different life. The ripple effect of that one decision would change the course of our lives, and potentially the lives of many others for generations. When you step back and consider the scale of that kind of impact, the nihilistic view that nothing matters becomes difficult to defend. The consequences of our choices stretch far beyond the present moment. In that light, our actions are not only real, it is inevitable that they matter. Still, her view of the afterlife and the idea of waiting for eternity to receive life's true rewards resonated with me. Even though we believed in paradise as the ultimate good, we also agreed that this belief should not prevent us from enjoying life on this side of eternity. Waiting for the afterlife alone was not a fulfilling way to live. Yet ironically, we found ourselves doing something quite similar in our own situation. We were postponing physical intimacy until she returned home and ended things with her boyfriend in person. That waiting started to feel like a contradiction. Why were we delaying our relationship when we had no guarantee of tomorrow? Life is fragile. We could not even be sure we would both still be here in 4 months. In truth, waiting carried its own risks. Perhaps even greater ones than choosing to embrace what we had in the present. So we turned to research and reflection for guidance. What we found confirmed our intuition. While it may be unwise to live solely for a distant future, it is equally important not to squander the present. Yesterday is gone forever, and tomorrow is always just out of reach. We cannot live in the past or in the future. The past can help us learn, but it cannot be changed. The future holds possibility, but it remains unknowable. And yet, it is only by taking action in the present that we shape what that future will be. We realized that if we were always waiting for the perfect conditions, we might miss the richness of the moment we were already in. Much of what we read echoed the same warning. Those who consistently sacrifice present joy for future rewards often end up dissatisfied. The challenge was clear. We had to find a way to live authentically, to act with intention, and to honor both the love that was growing between us and the values we believed in. Despite all that we had read and discussed, we still decided it was better to wait than to give in to our desires and introduce a physical element to our relationship. We concluded that the fear of death and the awareness that life is short was not just a source of anxiety, but also a powerful motivator to pursue our dreams while we still had time. Much of our research pointed to the importance of keeping the brevity of life in view, to stay focused on our long-term goals. We also came to see that meaning doesn't come from attaining a goal, but from the pursuit itself. Our shared intention to build a romantic relationship gave our days purpose. Ironically, we understood that once we fully achieved that goal, its power to create meaning might diminish. But for now, the pursuit itself gave us direction. We spent hours talking and getting to know each other. By that point, there was little we didn't know about one another. And even though we believed life was unpredictable, we held on to the hope that everything would work out in the end. I told her I didn't think it was a coincidence that I had left my cafeteria job and ended up working at the music school just in time to meet her. When we considered her path as well, it all felt like more than chance. I sensed that something beyond us had brought us together, as if the universe had been conspiring to align our lives. By then, finals week had arrived, and it became harder to talk as often as before. I also knew she would soon be heading back home to Portland, Oregon. On our final night working together, we barely had time to speak because of the student concerts. We had only one day left to see each other before she left. That night we met for coffee. At one point, I felt a sudden urge to embrace her. I asked if I could hold her, and she agreed. I wrapped my arms around her shoulders and held her tightly. When I looked into her eyes, I saw sadness. It was the sorrow of holding something precious, yet not being able to enjoy it fully. Her tears moved me to tears of my own. I felt incomplete, aching for something I longed to have but could not. I confessed that I wanted to break our pledge and hold her more intimately. She admitted she felt the same. We were suffering from the absence of physical closeness, and yet in that suffering, I found something meaningful. It reminded me of Nietzsche's words, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." I was beginning to understand what that meant. A meaningful life isn't free of pain. It's one where the pain is made bearable by love, purpose, or faith. This truth had been woven through my own life. It was there during my illness, when my grandmother's love gave her the strength to care for me. Her goal was to see me well, and that gave her life meaning despite the hardship. In turn, I didn't want to let her down. That sense of purpose gave me a zest for life that helped me transcend the suffering I endured. Both of us had a why, and that allowed us to bear the pain. My grandmother also believed in paradise. For her, heaven gave meaning to life's trials. She used to sing a song that said in essence, "When I get to heaven there will be no pain, no sickness, and no death. What I have lost on this earth will be returned 1,000 times over, and the reward of heaven will be greater than anything I could imagine here on earth." Her belief made her suffering bearable. In our own way, we were learning the same lesson. We accepted the sorrow that came with living a disciplined, meaningful life. When it was finally time to say goodbye, I hugged her, but neither of us wanted to let go. She said I should be the one to let go first. I said it should be her. After a few minutes of back and forth, we agreed to let go at the same time. We both laughed, trying to hide the ache in our hearts. I said goodbye, not knowing if it would be the last time I ever saw her. Before parting, we exchanged home phone numbers and addresses, and we promised to write to each other over the summer. And write we did. Right after she left, I sat down to write my first letter to her, pouring out the feelings I hadn't yet been able to say aloud. Because long-distance phone calls were expensive and would have cost my parents money, we seldom spoke on the phone. Most of our communication took place through handwritten letters, which we exchanged weekly. The anticipation of hearing from her was intoxicating. I still remember receiving her first letter. I must have read it at least 20 times that day. And yet, even more overwhelming than the letter itself was the growing anticipation of seeing her again. In that first letter, she told me that she had broken things off with her boyfriend. Her mother, she said, was not pleased. The boyfriend came from a well-to-do family her mother had known for over a decade, and her mother believed that our relationship was just a passing phase. She was convinced that in time her daughter would see the light and return to the old boyfriend. I felt bad for her, but I was so certain about being with her that nothing could deter what felt inevitable. 2 weeks into the summer break, I was overwhelmed with the thought of possibly seeing her again. I even considered flying out to Portland, Oregon to visit her. But the trip was too expensive, and I needed to save money for school in the fall. When I explained my situation, she understood. She told me how much she appreciated me, and how much she was looking forward to seeing me again. In each letter, we counted down the days until we'd be reunited. At one point, she mentioned she'd come down with a stomach bug and couldn't keep any food down. I remember how helpless I felt just thinking about her being in pain. To say I was in love with her would be an understatement. Throughout the summer, we wrote back and forth about the details of our lives. She told me she had lost some weight, and that worried me. I was afraid she might be more sick than she let on. But she reassured me that everything was okay. My desire to find meaning in life had not diminished. In fact, it was stronger than ever. I spent much of my time researching, reading, and trying to make sense of it all. In the process, I encountered the works of Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Plato, Aristotle, Christian thinkers like Thomas Aquinas and Augustine, as well as non-believers. Some argued that the purpose of life is to pursue happiness. I was living in a country that enshrines the pursuit of happiness in its Declaration of Independence, likely influenced by Aristotle, who once wrote, "Happiness is the ultimate end and purpose of human existence." It sounded appealing. Who wouldn't want a happy life? But building one's entire purpose around happiness felt unrealistic, even hollow. Still, I pressed on. I studied a range of views from Epicurus, who argued that happiness comes not from indulgence but from minimizing pain, to those who believe that complete happiness is unattainable on this side of eternity. One figure who had a profound impact on me was Leo Tolstoy. He was celebrated as one of the greatest writers of the 19th century, and known for exceptional works like War and Peace and Anna Karenina. He lived in immense wealth and privilege, with more than 100 servants at his estate. And yet by the age of 50 he sank into despair, convinced that his life lacked meaning. He became so depressed that he contemplated suicide. In his search for answers, he turned to philosophy, religion, science, and every source of knowledge he could find. After this exhaustive search, he arrived at 4 possible responses to life. The first was ignorance, which meant remaining unaware of life's deeper realities. This path he found impossible, since he could not unlearn what he had already learned. The second was hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure and enjoyment, but this too he found ultimately unfulfilling. The third option was suicide, a deliberate end to life, yet he admitted he lacked the strength to carry it out. The final option he identified was what he called cowardice, to continue living without meaning, not because life held value, but simply because he could not bring himself to end it. Eventually, Tolstoy concluded that faith in something greater than oneself was essential to finding a modicum of meaning. Reason alone, he believed, could not answer life's most profound questions. That insight struck me deeply. Here was a man who had everything, yet still could not find peace. His journey validated my own restless search. Still, I wasn't sure what to do with all I had learned. How does one live out these insights? I was beginning to feel, in a way, like Frederick Douglass upon realizing the full weight of his slavery, acutely aware of a truth he could never unsee, but unable to act on it completely. Like Tolstoy, I had learned too much to go back. The more I dug into the nature of life, the more questions I uncovered, and the more unsatisfied I became with the answers. Most of these questions had no logical resolution. I craved explanations that make sense, but I found that the most satisfying answers did not come from the physical world. The metaphysical realm seemed to be the only place where life's deepest mysteries might be answered. Strangely, the more I searched for meaning, the more suffering I uncovered. It began to feel like the search itself was a source of pain. In response, I turned to research on coping mechanisms for dealing with life's unanswerable questions. I began to feel that life itself was not what it appeared to be. It was like being cast into a Shakespearean tragedy, handed a role without any knowledge of what had happened in the story before I entered. So I did what any actor might do. I played my part and learned from those who had come before me. Life, I realized, was a complex play filled with joy, suffering, love, grief, and everything in between. Then my consciousness reminded me, just as I wasn't there when the play began, I wouldn't be there when it ended. I would die before the final act. So the question became, should I keep striving to understand and fulfill my role, or should I surrender, knowing the play will go on with or without me? That was how I felt about life at the time. The realities of life laid bare in front of me. The awareness that life involves suffering led me on a determined quest to make the most of it. But how was I to pursue this path meaningfully? My research suggested that once a person begins to explore the deeper truths of life, two broad responses emerge. The first is to escape from reality through distraction or denial. The second is to face reality directly, even with the difficult knowledge that all lives must come to an end. Can one enjoy a piece of music knowing that the song will end? Can one enjoy a basketball game knowing that the game will end? In fact, the finitude of life imbues it with a sense of urgency to make the most of the experience. I believed it was possible to enjoy life despite its brevity. Of the two responses to life's reality, the easier one and the one most commonly chosen is the path of escape. Many turn to alcohol, drugs, or other forms of numbing pleasure to block out the discomfort that truth brings. But this is a cycle without resolution. The questions of meaning always return, and so does the impulse to escape. Over time, these habits not only fail to satisfy, they also cause more suffering. For example, the brief euphoria of intoxication from alcohol consumption pales in comparison to the long-term damage it causes. The hangovers, health issues, and emotional consequences linger long after the pleasure has passed. Yet, in the absence of a better alternative, many continue down this path. Others choose a different kind of escape, not through substances but through conformity. They follow the path society has laid out, not because it aligns with their deepest values, but because it is easier and safer than carving out a new way. Most people settle for a surface-level understanding of life, never pressing deeper into what it might mean to become their full, authentic selves. This societal path is familiar. From childhood, we are taught to obey instructions rather than ask questions. School leads to college, then to work, marriage, retirement, and eventually death. Most people follow that course without ever stopping to reflect. Those who do begin to question it often discover that reversing course is not so easy. The cost of college can leave young people burdened with debt large enough to prevent them from taking creative risks or starting a business. In many cases, this debt cannot be erased, even through bankruptcy. It becomes a kind of invisible shackle that shapes a person's options for decades. Along the way, consumer culture tells us that joy can be bought. We are promised happiness if we purchase a new car, a better phone, or a luxury vacation. And while these things may bring fleeting pleasure, they often leave behind stress, debt, and a lingering sense of dissatisfaction. The thrill fades quickly, but the consequences remain. Who can blame people for seeking comfort where they can find it? Given how many hours people work, it is no wonder they feel drained and desperate to escape. After a long workday and a stressful commute, most have little energy left for anything beyond dinner and sleep. Then the cycle repeats. In contrast, before the industrial era, people labored all day just to survive. There was little time for existential questioning. But modern comforts and technologies have given us more time to think, and with that time comes the unsettling realization that many lives feel devoid of deeper meaning. For some, religion no longer offers the solace it once did. So what fills the empty space? Many turn to entertainment, movies, sports, travel, food, or thrill-seeking. These are not inherently bad, but they often serve as ways to avoid confronting the deeper questions. I considered what it might mean to choose the harder road, the one less traveled, the one that leads toward authenticity. This path demands strength. It asks a person to question the norms, to break free from the comfort of conformity, and to live in alignment with their own values. At the time, I was already entangled in the traditional route. I had gone to public school, followed the expectations, enrolled in college, and taken on student debt. By then, I was staring down a future that had already been charted for me. What choice did I have? There was no obvious alternative. I could not undo the steps I had already taken. But I could try to learn more, to reflect, to question, and to prepare myself to break free from the parts of that path that no longer served me. The question became, how can I use what I know to improve my trajectory? How can I transform a life shaped by obligation into one shaped by meaning? My search for meaning had opened my eyes in many ways. But understanding life's truths was one thing, applying them was another. It seemed as if the default condition of life was one of suffering and confusion. I wanted to carve out a life that did not conform to society's expectations, but I also realized that simply doing the opposite of societal norms meant that I was being shaped by society nonetheless. The real challenge was to create a path based on the values I truly believed in, a path that felt honest, personal, and grounded in a deeper purpose. But how was I going to do that? What good was all the knowledge I had gained, if I could not use it to build a life filled with meaning? If I was to beat the odds and fulfill my potential, I needed to take what I had learned and apply it in a way that would bring psychological peace, foster growth, and help me navigate the inevitable pain of living. The insights of great thinkers and the example of my grandmother had given me a foundation. Their teachings clarified many truths about life. But now I had to figure out how to use that foundation to create a life of purpose, one that balanced the pursuit of peace and happiness without losing sight of the reality of suffering. Through my reading, I came to believe that a meaningful life was more important than simply chasing happiness. While the brain's pleasure chemicals are well known, they are not easy to control. Too much pleasure, like too much pain, can become a source of suffering. Life, I began to understand, would always include both moments of joy and moments of hardship, days spent in the valley and days on the mountaintop. While happiness is certainly preferable to misery, it no longer seemed to me like the true aim of life. Instead, I saw it as a byproduct of a meaningful existence. Thinkers like Carl Jung and Friedrich Nietzsche explored the idea that we often fail to live lives that match our deepest abilities. Abraham Maslow extended this idea, arguing that human beings are driven by a desire to grow. But growth, he said, only becomes possible after our basic needs for food, safety, belonging, and esteem are met. Maslow described self-actualizers as people who experience a deep and grounded sense of fulfillment. They are grateful for life, focused on self-improvement, and committed to developing their own unique identities. They are not overly influenced by public opinion, yet they maintain a strong sense of kinship with humanity. What struck me most was that neither Jung nor Nietzsche nor Maslow grounded their ideas in a belief in God. This raised a critical question for me. How could I integrate their valuable insights into my daily life without compromising the core spiritual truths that had carried me this far? I believed in a greater purpose, a divine presence, and an eternal dimension to life. That belief was not something I could set aside. My long-term goal was clear. I wanted to build a meaningful life rooted in my values, my faith, and my growing understanding of human nature. But I knew I could not reach that goal all at once. I would need to break it down into smaller, manageable steps and give myself time to grow into the kind of person who could live that life. For the time being, though, those goals and aspirations would have to wait. The summer was drawing to a close, and a new season of life was about to begin. Finally, the summer came to an end, and it was time to return to school. It had been the longest summer I had ever experienced, but also the most satisfying. I had learned so much about life, and my relationship, though not yet realized in full, had blossomed into something profoundly meaningful. To say I was excited about the future would be an understatement. My life felt full of meaning. I was eager to see my girlfriend again. We planned to arrive on campus a few days before classes started, so we could spend time together and make up for the 5 months apart. I arrived first and waited in my dorm for her to call. The anticipation built with each passing hour. Finally, the phone rang. She was on campus and wanted me to come see her. I remember running the entire 2 miles to her dorm in the rain, my heart pounding with excitement. When she saw me from the lobby, she ran toward me in the rain, and the moment she leapt into my arms, we kissed for the first time. It felt like a scene from a movie. People nearby stopped what they were doing and began clapping, as if they instinctively knew we were in love and were rooting for us. That kiss, after months of emotional buildup, was the most meaningful I had ever experienced. At that moment, the long wait had been worth it. When I finally had a chance to look at her closely, I noticed how much weight she had lost. She looked different, almost unrecognizable. I asked her about the change in her appearance, and she explained that she had spent the summer exercising to improve her health and look her best. Then I remembered her letters. She had mentioned losing weight and struggling to keep food down. The pieces fell into place. I gently asked if she was dealing with an eating disorder. She didn't say anything at first. Then she nodded. I held her hands and we went into her dorm room. We sat on her bed and poured our hearts out to each other. I told her that my feelings for her had little to do with her physical appearance. I had fallen in love with her when she was 15 pounds heavier, and I was still completely in love with her. We held each other as she cried. Her vulnerability touched me deeply. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and I could hardly believe she was in love with me. I even pinched myself to make sure it was real. And yet, despite her beauty, she could not see in herself what I saw so clearly. She began to open up about her struggle with body image and insecurity. I wasn't sure how best to help her, so we began researching together. We learned that eating disorders often involve both physiological and psychological components. There were connections to low self-esteem, anxiety, and distorted body image. I made sure to tell her as sincerely as I could that I loved her regardless of how much she weighed. Still, I sensed that part of her didn't fully believe me. I tried to support her through encouragement, consistency, and kindness. I urged her to seek professional help and she agreed. Within 2 days she scheduled an appointment. I promised to stand by her. That day, which I had imagined as the happiest of our relationship, had unexpectedly become a sad one. But it was one with a silver lining. I told her that I was glad she had shared her struggles with me, because acknowledging a problem is the first step toward healing. Ironically, the physical aspect of our relationship, which I had been so eager to experience, now felt far less important. What mattered far more was the connection we shared, the trust we were building, and the love we had for one another. Through all of this, one truth became clear. Life is never perfect. Suffering is universal. No matter how carefully or morally you live, suffering will still come. That is part of the human condition. How you respond to suffering reveals who you truly are. Of course, I wanted to be ready for that reality, not be paralyzed by it. That was when I turned to Stoicism, a philosophy that teaches us to accept what we cannot control and focus on how we respond. That wisdom felt especially important as we entered this new chapter together.